Trump is continuing to receive backlash over his racist tweets about 4 congresswomen of color. The freshman Democrats are now calling for the president's impeachment. Trump defended his comments, though, at the White House yesterday.
If you're not happy here, then you can leave. As far as I'm concerned, if you hate our country, if you're not happy here, you can leave. And that's what I say all the time. That's what I said.
Now the 2020 candidates are weighing in, and our Ed O'Keefe is in Iowa. Ed, how is this playing out on the campaign trail? I'm sure the president gave these candidates plenty to talk about.
Well, sure. Democratic presidential candidates out here on the campaign trail get asked all the time, Anne-Marie, about something the president did or said. Sometimes it's once a day, sometimes it's several times a day. Sometimes they try to deflect and change the subject, but not this time.
Those were racist tweets.
It's sickening. It's embarrassing.
But from day one of his presidential campaign,
They're bringing crime, they're rapists,
and ever since,
for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
the president has repeatedly stoked racial tensions.
And you had some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
Democratic frontrunner Joe Biden said it's not just the president who he disagrees with.
What do you say to Americans who might agree with what the president tweeted yesterday?
I say I'm ashamed of you.
So you'd say that the voters...
I'd say that anybody who's that racist, I'm ashamed of a racist.
President Trump refused to back down, in part because he believes his supporters will stand by him. Many that we heard from yesterday do.
I know some people don't like his tweets and they think he's crass, and that's why I voted for him.
It's unfortunate he had to do the way he had to do it. He's doing the only way he can to get this country back.
If you think you have it better or in where you came from or with how they did things there, go back where you came from.
All right, Ed O'Keefe is joining me now. I gotta say, Ed, I'm kind of stunned by, the comments that you guys received from Trump supporters. I mean, that last lady, the point of the outrage is that we are talking about American citizens. There's no place for them to go back to unless it's Michigan or the Bronx. And the point is that the president said this about 4 women of color. And would he have said this about white representatives? But I digress, sorry, and I sort of move away from my journalistic cap, but that is stunning. So we heard from Joe Biden. Have you heard from any of the other candidates on this?
Well, yeah, as you heard there, Julian Castro, who said that, this speaks to a sort of historical trend that people try to raise doubts about certain groups of people as they move into this country, and that is no surprise. To a person, every Democratic presidential candidate that's been asked describes what the president said as racist. Some call him a racist, but it is something that, as I said at the top, they don't always like to be asked about something he said or did. Same thing up on Capitol Hill. Members of Congress don't like to spend their days responding to what the president did. But in this case, Democratic presidential candidates understood it had to be discussed, it had to be talked about. Probably the most notable and sort of true statement that came from a presidential candidate yesterday was Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, who told us, look, he does this all the time. He tries to enact policies that he knows are going to get caught up in the courts and likely tossed out as a way to stoke his base. He says things like this to stoke his base, and it distracts the news media and the American public in general from other important issues. She's got a point. But on this one, she also understood that it was something that couldn't be allowed to be ignored. And in her case, Ilhan Omar, the congresswoman from Minneapolis, is from her state. So she sort of feels a home state obligation to speak up for one of her colleagues.
Yeah, it is a very interesting point that Klobuchar makes because, race has already sort of been part of the 2020 campaign conversation in regards to reparations. Certainly the president loves to bring up the criminal justice system and stuff like that. But he also likes these sort of hot button social issues, right? And you allow him in a way to dominate the conversation when you jump on every comment that he makes. So do you expect the candidates to sort of continue along this line? Obviously race is going to be a 2020 campaign issue, but just what aspect of it, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask you.
Well, it certainly is an issue. It will remain an issue, in part because of what the president does and says, in part because they're discussing it amongst themselves and raising questions about their past. The whole situation with Joe Biden and segregation as senators, as amplified by Senators Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, and others. Again, now concerns about what the president has said. And there will undoubtedly be other issues. And I think it speaks to the fact that the Democratic Party especially is in the midst of a big conversation with itself about where and how exactly it should be seeking support. Do you try to win back those states that the president won narrowly, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, that are in the Midwest or the industrial sections of the country and are predominantly white? Or do you plot a new path across the Southwest and the South, in Florida, in Georgia, in Arizona, in Texas, places that are far more diversified, have a younger population, have a bigger percentage of Latino and black voters, and just, what exactly is the best way to do this? That is a debate that underlies everything else that's going on right now, and it will be manifested at some point this time next year when there's a nominee, and that nominee heads out and figures out how they get to 270 electoral votes. You could argue that you should go back to those 4 states that the president won by narrow margins, because all you have to do there is find people, especially in the big cities, who didn't turn out to vote in 2016. And how do you talk to them and how do you get them to turn out? You discuss issues like the racial tensions in this country and how they should be addressed. So it will continue to be a main topic of conversation, whether folks like it or not.
Ed, before I let you go, I got to ask you about this resolution that's going to be voted on today in the House, condemning those tweets. Some people might say, okay, a resolution saying those tweets are terrible. What's the point of that? What is the point of that, Ed?
Not only the point of that, but shouldn't we be going farther? I spoke with one senior House Democrat last night who suggested that there are many in the House Democratic caucus who'd like to censure the president or like to slap him a little harder on the wrist and not just issue some kind of non-binding resolution that will have no effect on him. So we'll see after they meet this morning whether Democrats indeed schedule that vote, because often in these situations, we've seen it a few times already this year, something gets written, certain group of Democrats say that's going too far and it risks my reelection. Another group of Democrats turn and say, no, it's not going far enough, and we got to stick it to them. The other thing that will happen here in the coming weeks, especially in the coming days, there are some really sensitive financial issues that have to be sorted out. The debt ceiling, a budget agreement before the end of September. There was a push to get it done before the August recess. There's like 7 legislative days left. You wonder, amid all this new tension, whether any actual official work can get done between Congress and the White House. And there's a growing sense, at least among Democrats, that there's no incentive to work with them.
And not a lot of time either. Ed, thank you so much.